Thank y'all. I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Is this adjusted right for everybody?
Yeah, you're great.
Good. My sobriety date's July 31st, 1991. I want to thank Dick and Laurie for inviting me, and I get emotional when I think about this club. I came in last night, and there are so many people here that I've watched come in this room, and they are such different people today than they were then. It's just special, and all clubs aren't like that. We've moved around some. We've been to a lot of places, a lot of different meetings. In fact, in Phoenix, we have each recently started a meeting because, well, I wanted one closer, and she wanted one in an area where there wasn't a bunch of people, and both those meetings have really done well. And if y'all ever come to Phoenix, we'd love to have you join us. My home group is the Sober on Central group, and it's a big book study. We meet once a week. And there are so many familiar faces here, and I have so many friends in this room. And, there's a guy sitting on the front row that I drank with. And, that means he's nearly as old as I am. And we had a lot of good times together, but I don't believe they come close to the times we've had in sobriety together. And Mac's been a big part of my sobriety. And so have a lot of other people here. My first introduction to the Llano Club was in an old beer joint down on Bama Road. And I went to a meeting there one time, and it was on Sunday morning. And Dudley showed up with a pickup with about 15 kids in the back of that pickup. And they were from whatever services group that he would go by and pick them up and take them to an AA meeting. And they'd steal the money out of the basket, and every one of them would borrow a cigarette. And that room, you could smoke on one side of it, and the other side you couldn't. And it had a fan, and it still smelled like beer when you walked in the front of it. And, but I felt so sorry for Dudley. I thought those kids were going to rob him, so I would go every Sunday to try to help in case I needed to. And that literally was how I got started going to the Llano Club. And it wasn't long after that, one time Kyle volunteered to lead a meeting on, I believe it was a Wednesday night. And all of a sudden, that meeting started getting real popular. And what's funny is what divided that meeting was a bingo game. They needed money, they couldn't pay their rent, and so they decided they were going to have a bingo. And half the club thought that it was against the traditions to have bingo, and they had such a fight over it that when they went ahead and had the first bingo match, the ones that were against it called the police, and it got raided. And so the club broke off, and several of us moved in the strip center just across the way east of here. And that was the start of this group of the Llano Club. And, so I have a lot of memories around here. And, when this side over here got started was about the time that Ronnie started coming. And everybody figured that if Ronnie Southers could get sober, anybody could get sober. So this club really got popular then. And I believe that to be true. I grew up in the Texas Panhandle. I was born in Amarillo. My father was a building contractor. My mother's side of the family were in the cattle business and ranching business. And all my life I was told that that's the way I needed to proceed. I remember as a little kid going out to the chuck wagon and eating those biscuits. all my heroes could roll a cigarette trotting on a horse in the wind with one hand. And I just thought that was about the coolest thing ever. I loved the way that cowboys drank whiskey in Miss Kitty's saloon on TV. And, I tried to emulate that as well. And, the first time I really remember having any consequences from alcohol, I was in the 6th grade, and I had a couple of buddies, and we'd built this fort between 2 garages, and we were going to play hooky and meet at that fort. And I forgot to play hooky that morning. My parents dropped me off at school, and the first class was PE, and so I thought, heck, I'm in trouble. So I kicked the soccer ball over the fence, and I went to get it. Soccer ball, and I threw it back over the fence, and I took off, thinking nobody would miss me. And we got caught at that fort. Like I say, I was in the 6th grade when they caught us. We had a 6-pack of malt liquor, a box of Swisher Sweet cigars, and a Playboy magazine. And I got whipped at school. When I got home, I got whipped again, and I didn't care. I'd done it again. I was so proud that we got caught with malt liquor, cigars, and Playboy magazine. And that's kind of the way my drinking went. I don't remember immediately loving the taste of it. I don't remember... I just thought that's what you were supposed to do. I don't know how I had that attraction to liquor. I remember first job I had was in Mexico turning chickens in a Sanborn restaurant. And literally I was 10 years old. And I know that because my little brother who's younger than me, was 1 year. He celebrated his 1-year birthday. And they thought it looked cute to have a blue-eyed gringo turning those chickens in the window, and I did, and they paid me in pesos, and I went to the supermercado next door and bought a bottle of Pinch Scotch. And I'd never tasted Scotch. It took all of my money, and it was in a clear bag, and I carried that bag around so everybody could see what I had. I got back to my parents' house, and I had a friend, Rip, and we buried that bottle in the backyard, and he and I went out there and drank some of it one day, and the next day it was gone. I'm sure the gardener found it. But, I just can't understand my attraction to liquor. But as time went on, I continued to be attracted to it, I guess, because I remember when I was in the 9th grade for the first time, I can remember buying Seagram 7 by the case. And not long after that, when you're buying Seagram 7 by the case in the 9th grade, your grades aren't usually very good. So my parents sent me to Darlington School for Boys. It was an Ivy League preparatory school in Rome, Georgia. And I was there about 6 weeks, and I got caught swimming with this girl at her house, and her dad happened to be one of the directors of that school, and we weren't in the proper attire, and he bought me a bus ticket back to Texas. And that was the second time I was in the 9th grade. No, the third time I was in the 9th grade, my parents thought that they needed to send me to New Mexico Military Institute to keep me out of trouble. That's where my dad had gone to school. And it was a pretty strict school, and my grades weren't good enough to get in. So they sent me to Allen Academy in Bryan, Texas. And I'm going to tell you, I thrived at Allen Academy. If your parents paid the tuition, you were going to have good grades at Allen Academy. Bought my first car there. It was a 1953 Dodge, and we pooled our money and paid $75 for it. And on Saturday afternoons, we would all get together and hop in that car and go to LaGrange. And we had to be back by 6 o'clock. And Tell you another story about the Llano Club. I told this story one time before, and because we were underage, when we'd go in the back of the establishment at LaGrange, they'd meet us and they wouldn't let it. They had a Coke machine that had beer in it and soda pops and everything. And this woman would stand there and be sure we only got Cokes because she knew we were underage. And then we'd go sit down on this bench, and if there were like 6 of us, there'd be like 8 girls that would come in. If there were 9 of us, there might be 12. But anyway, that was the deal. And we knew we had to be back at school by 6 o'clock or we'd get caught. So those women would charge one fee, but they all had their hair rolled up. And you'd get a discount if they didn't unroll their hair. So I always would say, I'm still partial to women with rollers in their hair. The first time I told my story at this club, when I showed up, every woman here had their hair in rollers. And so I am so happy to be here again. My drinking continued to have more consequences, and some of them began to get more severe. And in 1969, I married a girl that I had dated off and on. Both of us went away to school. And whenever I wasn't away at school, I was only allowed to stay at my parents' house for 1 week. And then as soon as that week was over, they'd send me to the ranch. And I would live in a bunkhouse with older guys and work hard. And we'd get up oftentimes at 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd be horseback 8 hours a day sometimes. We'd flank calves and brand, and it'd be hot. And we worked 7 days a week. But I just loved it, and I loved those guys. It was a dry county, and but they always had beer. And, somebody would go get it. So anyway, one of the girls that I would date when I was home for that week, one time she said that her mother was an alcoholic and her life was getting hard because of it, and she thought it'd be a good idea if we got married. And I said, sounds like a good deal to me. So I got married in 1969. I was 21. And, I used to tease about that, but today I know that I was not anywhere near mature enough to be in that kind of relationship. We moved to a little town called Clarendon, 60 miles away where most of the ranches were. And, drinking wasn't a real problem. We would drink some on the weekends at first, and life was pretty good. We had 2 children. The first one, the girl was born in 1975 and the boy in 1979. And, I occasionally would overshoot the mark every time we go drink. Clarendon was dry, but I have a lot of friends in Amarillo, and we go there to drink. And as my drinking progressed, I would sometimes usually pass out on the way back to Clarendon from Amarillo. And my wife, for some reason, when you drink like that, they become annoyed with you, and they don't spend a lot of time getting you out of the car when you get home. And it can be 20 degrees in Amarillo. And I'd wake up out there just freezing to death. But my thought was never that I needed to watch my drinking. I thought, I need to put a heater in this garage. And that's the way an alcoholic brain works. It made sense to me. Years later, my little brother built a house, or redid a house next door and built a big garage. I said, be sure you put a heater in there. And he did. And he's one of us, and he used it several times. He also has been quick to tell me that several times he went down to his garage and I was out there passed out in his car. But anyway, in 1981, the aunt died that owned all the property, and 1981 was about the worst year that you could die as far as inheritance tax goes. They came and told us that we owed 48% of market value, and market value on ranch land's about 200 times more than you can make with it. And then they said that for the first time they're going to hook interest to prime, and prime in 1981 went to 20%. So all of a sudden we went from owing nothing to owing more money than I could imagine, and having to pay 20% interest on it. And our annual payroll wouldn't even cover the interest on that loan. I began to sell property, and when I would sell property then, they had a thing called alternative minimum tax. If it comes over this amount of money, then you still owe another tax. So I owed also capital gains tax and then alternative minimum tax, and I wasn't making any progress. I was just having less property to try to pay the interest with, and that's when my drinking really took a different turn, and it became difficult to sleep at night, and the only way I could sleep all night was to drink scotch. And I would get up in the middle of the night, and if I couldn't go back to sleep, a double scotch, and I'd sleep another hour or so, and I still might have to get up at 4:30 or 5, drive 50 miles and work cattle all day. And it was taking its toll on me. I wasn't very much fun to live with. My my son one day came and gave me a talk and told me that, and I'm sure somebody had told him that he thought I might have a problem with alcohol, and he wished I'd quit drinking, that it was embarrassing for him when I'd pass out in our front yard, because he lived on the street that everybody walked to school on in his class, and he'd have to answer questions about what I was doing with my head tucked under me laying out in the yard when he got to school. And, the best I could do was just tell him that was his problem and he needed to figure that out. And my daughter, she never seemed to be bothered. She and I had a different relationship than my son and I. We were as close as a father and daughter can be. She'd go work cattle with me. I had a racehorse business, and we'd go to Ruidoso a lot on the weekends. She'd always go with me, and I could do no wrong in her eyes. And as my drinking progressed, my wife one day told me that she thought I needed to move out of the house, and she didn't want me around the kids. And so I moved into this little hunting shack out on the ranch. And, I didn't have a telephone. It was about 30 miles out of town. You had to cross a creek to get there. It was on top of a hill. And I had that thing just spick and span clean. I would sleep on the couch and then put everything, my blanket and pillow, back in the closet, so that if anybody showed up, the house would look like it was in really good shape. And I'd watch videos at night, and that you'd rent it at Allsup's. And those, one time I watched this video, and this guy was talking about he was trying to be a doctor, but all he did was party. His parents would send him to school, and he was going to medical school, and he never went to class. He just drank and partied, and it came time for him to graduate from medical school in this video, and he was going to go home. He was from Midwest, and he was going to go home and tell his parents he's sorry he wasted their money, but he wasn't going to be a doctor because he never went to school. And when he got off the plane in this little town after he graduated, the whole town showed up at the airport. And his parents had bought the local clinic out where the only doctor had retired, and everybody in town thought they had a new doctor showing up, and he was going to take care of them. And he didn't know what to say. He got off and he was standing there and they handed him a microphone. And he said, well, I'm so-and-so and I'm a doctor and I can cure anything but a drug addict or an alcoholic, and they need to go to the Betty Ford Center. And that was about all he could say. And, my finances, my personal finances had gotten in worse shape than the ranch's because I was trying to support my family and keep things going, and I would go from one bank and borrow money. There were two banks in that little town. They were across the street from each other. And I'd go to one bank and borrow money and pay interest at the bank across the street. And this had been going on for a while, and I was getting where I owed both those banks quite a bit of money. And one day I was in one of those banks. Well, in fact, it was the day after I watched that video about the guy that wasn't a doctor. And the president invited me back to his office, and I was telling him how much money I needed and what I needed it for. And he wasn't coming through with it very quickly. And I was stuttering and making up excuses. And finally I said, and I'm kind of thinking about going to the Betty Ford Center. And I had no intention of quitting drinking, going to the Betty Ford Center, but I didn't know what else to say. And he said, I think that'd be a damn good idea. And he turned around and called their 800 number while I'm sitting in his office. And today I know that's God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I decided, well, you know what, it might be a pretty good thing to get out of town. So I'm visiting with that guy on the phone, and he's asking me a lot of funny questions, and I couldn't, And they said, well, you need to give us a number, and we're going to call you back in about a week, and this will be the time we'll call back. So I gave him my house number and told my wife that I needed to be at home at that time because I was going to get this call from the Betty Ford Center, and I was thinking about going there. She said, well, I think that'd be great, but we won't be here when you come. So anyway, that was the start of my entrance. My little brother flew out there with me, and if I'd known what the Betty Ford Center was or where it was, I would have never picked July 31st as a sobriety day. It was 116 when I got off the plane out there. And everybody thought it was my little brother that was checking in, not me. And we probably should have tried to get a better deal for two because he's one of us as well. However, he's sober today, thank goodness. And but anyway, that was the start of my recovery. And while I was there one day, I could identify with everything those people were saying. And I began to think that I might be one of y'all. And but they talked about God a lot. And so I decided I was going to go out and make a deal with God. I learned to pray at the racetrack, and I didn't have a lot of faith in God. And so I said, God, if you'll let this one guy that gets up at the end of every meeting and shares, when they ask if anybody has a burning desire, that guy goes on for 15 minutes, and I don't get to smoke a cigarette before the next class, whatever. I said, if one time you'll not let him get up at the end of the meeting, I'll just give it over to you. And but that guy never did. He's still talking if they'd let him. And but the next day, I got Paige to come to the office, and when I got there, my wife was there, and I thought something's up because she wasn't talking to me when I left town. And she told me that there had been an accident and that my brother was drinking and so was my daughter, and they were at a rodeo in Wichita Falls. Our ranch would go down and compete in what they now call ranch rodeos, and that was the first one ever. We'd been doing that for several years. In fact, we'd won the first couple, and it was a big tradition. And there was a dance there, and my little brother told my daughter to leave, and she didn't want to leave, and he grabbed her and took her out, and they were headed back to town, and she jumped out of the car, and he swerved, and she jumped out of the car, and he swerved and ran over her head, and she died. And the last time I saw her was the day I went to treatment. When I left to go out there, she stole her mother's car and drove down Morella at the airport, and to tell me goodbye. And she said, "Dad, I don't care if you drink or don't drink. You're the best dad ever, and I love you, and I can't wait till you get back." And that was the last time I ever saw her. And so I went with my wife, and we got on the plane, flew back to Clarendon where I live, and we made arrangements that same day for the funeral. And I'm going to say it was the second day after that we were having the service. And it was sort of our tradition on those kind of things for everybody to drink, go over to the house after the funeral, and everybody do a lot of drinking. And a lot of my friends from all over the country were there, and we went over to my house, and I remember that the day before I left, I'd celebrated 15 days. And when I did, they gave me a little plastic chip that says, "We care." It's like one of those NA chips, and it's on a little key ring. I had that thing in my pocket. Usually I bring it when I talk, but I don't have it today. But I remember I was standing at the liquor cabinet, and I was going to fix a drink for a bunch of my friends. And my counselor, when I left, he said, "If you drink, just come back. We can start over." And, I reached in my pocket and I felt that chip. And I just put it around my finger and I wrapped it up. And I thought, I'm going to try this 24-hour bullshit they're talking about. And I'm going to see if for 24 hours I can not drink right now. And I didn't. And the next day I got up, and but I still fixed drinks, and I sat up with all my friends, and I never drank. And I'm sure, I remember asking for God's help on that airplane going to Clarendon. I said, "God, please help me. I don't know what to do, but help me." And he must have been working, because to this day, I haven't had another drink. That's still my sobriety date. And I thought, I need to come back home, and I need to be around my son, and I need to tend to business and get some stuff done here. And my wife said, "We don't want you here. You need to go back to treatment." And I called my father-in-law, and I said, "Do you think you could give me a ride back to Palm Springs?" And he said, "Meet me at the airport." And I remember I went to the airport, got on that plane, and I flew back. And I remember there was an old man that picked me up at the airport. And at the Betty Ford Center, they have a lot of volunteers. And that old man was so kind and so sweet. He's probably been sober 50 years. And he gave me a ride back, and he gave me a book and some stuff. But I just remember I could feel his kindness. And when I got back to my dorm room, my counselor was there, and he looked at me. And he said, "I don't have anything to tell you. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to advise you. But what I can tell you is I love you with all my heart." And he hugged me like I've never been hugged. And I felt that love. And, I often say that in AA, it's a spiritual program, not a religious program. And I believe that spirit is love. And I believe that that's what a newcomer feels when he walks in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know they feel it at this club. And I believe that's the spirit. And, I'm just so thankful that I experienced that day. I went ahead, and it was just a 30-day treatment. I ended up going back to Texas. I still had every problem when I got back that I had before I left. I just, they had one meeting a week in that little town. And they told me that I needed to have a contact person, and the contact person was an Episcopal priest where my wife went to church. And the last time I'd gone was on Christmas Eve, and he was up there doing his deal. She made me sit on the front row at midnight mass, and I started going, "Praise the Lord," every time he'd do anything. And then I got up there for communion. I drank the whole thing at once. And I could see steam coming out of his ears. When I got back to Clarendon, he was my contact person. His name was Ned, and he said, "I've been waiting for you." And we became good friends. But things. I still had lots of debt, and things didn't get any easier or any better. I ended up having to sell nearly all the ranch. My brother and I decided to split our partnership up, and my wife and I still weren't getting along very good, but I thought that I would try to stay in that relationship for my son, and he and I weren't close to begin with, and that didn't help a whole lot either. And he was mad at my brother, and just my life was in bad shape in a lot of ways. And I'd go to that one meeting, and I didn't really want to go there because I used to drive by that meeting and throw my empties in a guy's pickup that went to that meeting every week. And I thought, I can't go there. I'll go to Amarillo. I picked a sponsor, and he tricked me into going to that meeting. And he said, "We don't have time to go to Amarillo. You need to go here in Clarendon." And I mean, I was reluctant, but I went. No, never forget though, I went in that meeting, and there was a woman there. Her name was Nadine Martin. And Nadine's sobriety date was 1948, same year that I was born. And she lived on a chicken farm, strangely enough, out on the edge of town. And her husband, Shine, short for Moonshine, was my first sponsor. And they'd sobered him up on their couch. They gave him a pint of whiskey, a half pint, 3 jiggers, 2 jiggers, 1. And he lived at their house and on their couch. And Nadine looked at me with those eyes that somebody that's been sober since 1948 has, and she just smiled, and she said, "I can promise it's going to be okay." And I never thought it could be okay again, but I knew she was telling the truth. And it made it so easy for me to go back and go to meetings because of Nadine. And I thought, you know what, I'm probably still going to get a divorce. I'm going to still have to sell all the ranch. I don't know what I'm going to do. My brother and I aren't getting along. And I think I can not drink because I knew that drinking wouldn't help anymore. If I thought drinking would help, I would have certainly had a drink, but I had gotten to a place that I knew drinking wouldn't work. And but I never ever thought I'd be happy again. I never thought I could ever be happy and joyous and free. And one day I was walking to that meeting, and Nadine had invited me to go eat homemade pie and ice cream with her afterwards. And I caught myself whistling walking to that meeting. And I thought, where'd that come from? I never thought I could have a happy thought, you know. And so anyway, to continue on, I started going to more meetings. And I started going to meetings in Amarillo. I started going to meetings at Aftercare. And I met a girl there. And she and I became friends. And I often say she had what I wanted and it wasn't AA. But because of that, I started going to more meetings. And she and I started hanging out. And I did get a divorce. I did sell all the ranches. I still had a couple leased. And this guy sitting on the front row bought my brother out, partly. And, he and I had a partnership. And, I stayed in the cattle business for probably another 8 or 9 years. Kyle and I had started hanging out. We ended up moving in together. My son got old enough that he was going to go away to school, and I didn't have to stay in Amarillo. And Kyle was living in Albuquerque or Taos, and I ended up moving over there because the 2 ranches that I had leased, one was outside of El Paso in Sierra Blanca, and the other one was still in Texas Panhandle in Albuquerque, strangely enough, just about halfway. And I told Kyle that I was moving to Albuquerque and I thought it'd be a good idea for us to move in together. She said she didn't think so. And so finally one day her lease was coming due and she said, you know what, if you could find us a place to live that meets all of these criteria that we could afford, she said, I might try it, but I don't want to live with somebody if we're not married. And so we did. I just, once again, God, at the end of the day, the realtor said, you know what? Said, my daughter has this little house, this little adobe house up near town of Placitas, and it's a 100-year-old adobe, and it's going to be for rent at the end of the month, and I think you'd be a good customer for her. And it was more than Kyle and I could imagine. We'd agreed to move in together, and things were pretty good at first. And we were going to meeting, and we were doing counseling at one of the meetings with a guy, and he was a lifesaver to us. And I remember one day he said, this relationship's gone about as far as it can go. Either y'all need to make a commitment and get married, or y'all need to go your separate ways. So we walked out of that meeting. I said, Kyle, you want to get married? She said, sure. And we ended up, she had a thing going on in New York in a few days, and we ended up going to New York, got married in Central Park and Shakespeare Gardens. And I would like to say that the rest was just smooth sailing. But, I wasn't near as good a member of Alcoholics Anonymous as Kyle was, and I still had a lot of debt. First she told me she wasn't going to marry me if I stayed in the cattle business. And then she said, my accountant told her, you shouldn't marry him because they're going to stick that debt on you. So there were a few bumps along the way. But one day I came home and she said, if you don't get a sponsor and work the steps, you need to move out. So I got a sponsor. Another sponsor. Welcome Back Jack was his name, Jack Lang. And they called him Welcome Back Jack because he had gotten so many desire chips. But he'd been sober 30 years at this time. And he and I worked steps together, and life began to get better. And, Kyle and I were going to a lot of meetings. And, I can tell you more funny stories and tease about it, but I would like to say today that Alcoholics Anonymous is the center of our life. Both of us have a lot of people we work with. There's sober people in our house all the time. We've moved a couple of times, and all of our friends are members of this group. The bunch that we hang out with in Phoenix, I'm the newcomer of the bunch. And we go to meetings 6 or 7 times a week, sometimes and always 4 or 5. Kyle goes still more meetings than I do. And she, but I can tell you, she has guided me in so many ways. Any of y'all that don't have a co-sponsor, I should highly recommend it, because I can tell you a couple of examples. One time I owed Max some money, and I thought, well, Mac's not in any hurry for that money, and I'm not in any hurry to pay him, and I need it elsewhere. She said, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to start holding money out of your check till we get enough for you to go pay Mac back that money that you owe him. And I didn't have any say-so in it. And as a result of that, I got to go pay Mac back that money that I'd borrowed from him, and I'll never forget. He looked at me. By that time, Mac was sober a few years too. And he said, I am so glad that you came to do this, because it gives me more faith in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I have been forced over and over to do the right thing, and it oftentimes is not my choice. But I am so thankful, and I have never once regretted it. I can tell you, every time I get more out of it than anybody else. Mac was very generous about that, and, he wasn't the only one that she held money out of my check for. And, I have a couple of good friends today that are still my good friends as a result of my co-sponsor. But, the other thing I really want to talk about a little bit today is that the relationship that I have with God is so completely different today. And it's a relationship that I learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when Kyle and I first moved here to Spring, I had to get a real job, and I ended up working in wastewater treatment for a company, and they started a bunch of projects out in Florida, and they wanted me to move to Florida. And I had just moved to Houston, and Kyle and I had just moved, and she had a business that she'd set up and started here. And I told them, I'm not very crazy about moving to Florida. And they said, well, we'll get you an apartment, and you go out there and stay 3 weeks, and then you can come home a week. And I said, well, I'm not very crazy about that. How about I go 2 weeks and come home a week and go 2 weeks? And they said, okay. Well, I was a newlywed, and that's not a great way to start out, as being gone 2/3 of the time. And my life was complicated. I was still in debt, but I was going to meetings, and, I started going to meetings out there in West Palm where my apartment was. And that same first year, they had 5 hurricanes, and my job called for me to manage a lot of trucking companies and truckers and trucks that hauled material out and dumped it on ranches. And that's why I was the guy for the job. I knew a lot of cattle people out there. And when you have 30 inches of rain, it's not very good for driving truck out on those ranches. And but though city of Hollywood still produced 8 truckloads a day of sewage sludge, and it wasn't going to stop. And I'm telling you, I had no idea where it was going or how. And my life was just very stressful. And one day, and I wasn't very comfortable in AA out there. I went to a lot of different meetings, and they didn't do it like the Atlanta Club or the one in Albuquerque or the ones I'd gone to. And one day I went to this meeting, and I heard this old man talk. His name was Pat Dawson. And I thought, man, that guy really has a message. And I asked somebody, where is he from? And they said, oh, he lives in West Palm, and he goes to a meeting called the Day Openers every morning at 7 o'clock. I looked it up, and it was about 5 minutes from my apartment. So I started going to that meeting every morning. Pat just took me under his wing. He called me Lone Star Bob. And he changed my life. I remember I'd go to him with all my problems and he'd say, just focus on your primary purpose and I promise all your problems will become where you can live with them. He didn't say they get great, but he said you can deal with it and you can live with it if you'll focus on your primary purpose. And all those new guys that come here and show up at this meeting in the morning said, ask them if you can take them out to dinner at night. Some of those guys are still my friend. And Pat used to say, if you go to AA by yourself, you're wasting gasoline. And he'd show up in the morning with 6 or 7 guys in his car every day. And then after that meeting, he'd take them to work because they didn't have a driver's license. And, he and I became friends. I never will forget one day. He said after that meeting, occasionally we'd go eat breakfast if he didn't have people to deliver, and especially on weekends. He said, well, I'm going to go meet my sponsor. I said, well, I want to go with you. I want to meet your sponsor. I want to know what kind of sponsor a guy like you has. And what he tells you. And he said, well, he tells me the same thing everyone ever has. I tell him I don't have enough money, and he tells me to get a job. And, he goes on and on through these things. But I've never seen anybody that practiced these principles in all of his affairs. And he was fearless. One time he was having trouble paying his mortgage because there'd been a bunch of fees added to it. He was living on fixed income. And his computer had gone haywire and his car wouldn't start. And he got to the meeting the next day and he said, I need help with this computer. Somebody needs to help me figure out this mortgage and somebody else needs to help fix my car. And he didn't worry about it. But next week, his computer's all fixed. Somebody's helped him get his deal refinanced. He has extra money and he's driving a new car. And that's just the way he was. And that's part of what I'm talking about, the God that I found in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I knew that God could keep me sober. And I knew that God could help me in a lot of ways. But I thought there's just a whole lot of things that God can't do. This summer I was up at our cabin. I was installing a shower. Kyle left town because I'm not real fun to be around when I'm doing that kind of stuff. And so she decided to go to Europe for 5 weeks. And this guy comes up to help me, and we get that shower all done, and it's time for him to come back to Houston. And he knew what he was doing. But we did all the plumbing, and we tore out the walls and did everything. And he had to leave the next morning. Well, we got it all finished and turned it on, and there was a leak under it. And I thought, well, I'm not even going to tell him about that leak because he'll try to stay up all night and fix it, and he needs to go home. And so there was a different kind of fitting underneath that shower that I'd never seen before. It was a pressure fitting, and he said he'd never used one either. You just job it up there and it holes as rubber in it. So that's what we did. Well, that's where it was leaking. And I looked online and I couldn't find anything. Mr. Google was no help. And so I thought, well, the plumber's out of town, I know, and the hardware store is only going to be open for about another hour to get parts, but I don't know what I need. And I started praying. And after I prayed, I opened my iPad, and there was a different name of that fitting. And I Googled that, and it showed how to do it. It said, you have to take this little bar on the top and twist it, and that makes that rubber expand, and that's what makes it hold. Well, I'd thrown that little bar away, but I raced into town, bought another fitting, and went back and turned it, and that thing quit leaking. And I thought, why would I wait till I've tried everything else before I pray about it? But that's kind of the way I do. But I can tell you that God has never failed me. And, I should talk more about working the steps. I worked the steps several times. I need to tell another story. I have two stories. One of them is about God, and it's when Mac and I had those cattle down there in Sierra Blanca on that ranch. And I had a bunch of Mexican steers down there. And that ranch was 130,000 acres. And I only had 2 employees full-time to help with that. And I was living in a trailer house down there, and Kyle would come down and visit me, and she'd help work cattle or lay pipe or whatever. And in the fall, I'd had some friends and guys that I used to work with from Clarendon would always come down 6 or 7, and they'd help us brand and ship or whatever, and they'd be there for 4 or 5 days or a week. And so they were all there, and we were trying to ship all these cattle, and we'd gathered 2 or 3 pastures and thrown them together in this little water lot. And I told the rest of the crew, you all go over to the other side of the ranch, and I'm going to keep Kyle and this one guy with me, one employee, and that'll be enough to pen these cattle out of this little pen when the trucks get here. I don't want to leave them shut up in there as hot as it is till the trucks get here. And those trucks were coming 500 miles one way to haul those cattle. And so I could see their dust when the trucks turned off the road, and I knew I still had nearly an hour before they got to where I was loading those cattle. So I saw their dust, and we started trying to pin those cattle, and they just kept running over the top of us. And man, I tried every trick I knew. I put feed in there, I roped one, tied one in there, and those cattle would not go. The sun was wrong, the dust was wrong, and they just turned around and run back over the top. I'd lost my voice hollering at them, and we were sitting there on our horses on the backside, and I said, Kyle, I'm going to have to go to the other side of the ranch and get more help, and that's going to take me at least 3 or 4 hours before I can get back with more help. And those truck drivers are going to be very mad because they want to load and go. And I said, you're just going to have to talk them into staying and waiting. And I said, but I've tried every damn thing I know to get these cattle in there, and I can't do it. She said, have you tried prayer? I said, Kyle, you are damn sure welcome to pray if you'd like to. But hurry up, because I need to go get those other guys. And we all were sitting there, and the other guy took his hat off, and he was holding it. I took my hat off, and we were holding it there. And while Kyle was praying, one of those steers threw his head up and ran in the pen. 300 followed him. That's a true story. Gary Scarborough still can't get over it. And, so I became better at using God that day. And I've been introduced to a completely different God in Alcoholics Anonymous. The other thing I need to share before I stop is that I was finding that my little brother was miserable. I thought, maybe he deserves to be miserable. And one day Kyle said, you need to quit being so angry about your brother. You need to call him and tell him how you feel. And I knew that when she told me something like that, it wasn't going to get better until I did it. So I called him and I said, Jinx, I need to tell you how I feel about what happened. And he said, I need to tell you how I feel about what happened. He said, if you hadn't have been gone, I wouldn't have felt responsible for your daughter. And I wouldn't have felt like I needed to take your place. And my life's been miserable ever since. And by that time, he was divorced. However, he also had become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was working with a sponsor and working with others, and I got madder because I knew that if he did the deal, he wasn't going to be miserable. That's what made her tell me I had to call him and tell him how I felt. And when he told me how he felt, I said, man, I am so sorry. I didn't see how I could have had any part in that. I was 15 miles away, and I realized that I played a huge part in that, and that I wrecked his life. And he and I cleared the air that day, both of us. And I'm happy to say today that he's my best friend in the world. And he's been sober 25 years, 28 years, and he and I talk on the phone almost every day. We laugh, we have a good time, and it is a miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a miracle about making amends. And, you know, if you don't do this thing perfect, you don't have to. Just keep showing up and pray to take direction, because most of the good things that I've gotten from Alcoholics Anonymous have all come from taking direction from somebody else. I still don't ever have a real good thought, but if I read the book and I pray, good things keep happening. And today, I have a life that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. It's beyond my wildest dreams. And it just keeps getting better. And my old friend Pat used to tell me, he said, I never had it so good, and the best is yet to come. So thank y'all for letting me be here.